In part one of our journey into the origins of Cinderella, we unveiled the roots of this timeless tale. But today, we're descending even deeper into its shadowy past, where darker, stranger, and far more unsettling versions lie hidden. What shocking secrets does the Cinderella story hold? Could it have been inspired by a real-life historical figure? And what older, more disturbing variations of this tale exist across the world? Join me as we unravel the chilling truths, twisted origins, and haunting versions of this iconic story. Welcome back, darklings. Long before pumpkin coaches and glass slippers, one of Cinderella's darker counterparts found herself hunted by her own father. Once upon a time, there was a king who had a queen with golden hair so radiant and a beauty so unmatched that no equal could be found on earth. Yet, even such beauty could not defy the hand of fate, and the queen fell gravely ill. As she lay on her deathbed, she called her husband to her side and made him promise one thing. If you remarry after I am gone, take no wife who is not as beautiful as I am, and whose hair is not as golden as mine. The king, stricken with grief, vowed to honour her wish, and with that, the queen closed her eyes for the last time. For a long while the king could not bear the thought of another wife, but his counsellors urged him to take a new queen. Reluctantly, the king sent messengers far and wide, searching for someone as beautiful as his late wife, yet no one could compare. The search seemed hopeless, but then, one day, the king's gaze fell upon his own daughter. She had come of age, and her beauty now mirrored her mother's, her golden hair gleaming like sunlight. A terrible thought took root in the king's heart, one that twisted his grief into something monstrous. "She is her mother's equal," he declared. "I will marry her." The counsellors were horrified. "Your Majesty," they pleaded, "this is forbidden. Such a sin will bring ruin upon the kingdom." But the king's desire drowned out their warnings. When the princess learned of her father's intentions, she was filled with dread. Hoping to dissuade him, she made an impossible demand. "Before I can marry you, you must give me 3 dresses, one as golden as the sun, one as silver as the moon, and one that glistens like the stars. And I must have a cloak made of 1,000 different animal pelts. Every creature in your kingdom must contribute a piece of its skin." Surely, she thought, this task could not be done. Yet the king's will was relentless. He summoned the finest weavers in the land to craft the dresses, and his huntsmen scoured the kingdom for furs. No animal was spared. In time, the impossible became reality. The dresses shone like the heavens themselves, and the cloak, stitched together from 1,000 pelts, was brought before the king. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will be wed." That night the princess knew she had no choice but to flee. Taking a golden ring, a tiny golden spinning wheel, and a golden reel, she packed the 3 magical dresses into a nutshell, donned the cloak of furs, and blackened her hands and face with soot. Under the cover of darkness she slipped away, surrendering herself to the mercy of the forest. Through the night, she wandered deep into the woods, her heart heavy with fear and sorrow. At last she found refuge in the hollow of a great tree, where she collapsed in exhaustion. The next day, as sunlight dappled the forest floor, the woods were filled with the sound of a royal hunt. The king of the land rode with his huntsmen, and his dogs, catching her scent, barked wildly at the hollow tree. "See what creature hides there," the king ordered. The huntsmen approached cautiously, and to their astonishment they found a figure covered in a patchwork of furs. "What kind of animal is this?" they exclaimed. Awakened by their voices, the girl cried out, "Please do not harm me. I am a poor child abandoned by my father and mother. Have pity and take me with you." The huntsman, moved by her words, brought her back to the castle, where she was given the name 1,000 Furs, and put to work in the kitchen. 1,000 Furs lived a miserable life, sleeping in a cupboard beneath the stairs, sweeping ashes and doing the castle's dirtiest work. But one day a grand banquet was held, and she begged the cook for permission to watch from the doorway. "Very well," the cook said, "but you must return in half an hour to tend to the fire." Hurrying to her little cubbyhole, she washed the soot from her face and hands, and from the nutshell, she retrieved the dress as golden as the sun. Dressed as a radiant princess, she slipped into the hall. Everyone stared in awe, and the king, enchanted by her beauty, danced with her. But as the final notes of the music played, she vanished, returning to her hiding place to resume her disguise. Before the night ended, she prepared the king's soup and secretly dropped her golden ring into the bowl. When the king discovered the ring, he demanded to know who had made the soup. The cook confessed it was Thousand Furs, but when she was summoned, she claimed to know nothing of the ring. At the next banquet, Thousand Furs donned the dress as silver as the moon. Again the king danced with her, and again she disappeared before he could learn her identity. This time she left a golden spinning wheel in his soup. At the third banquet, she wore the dress that sparkled like the stars. As they danced, the king slipped a ring onto her finger, vowing to uncover her secret. But this time, she lost track of time. In her haste to flee, she couldn't fully change into her disguise. She threw the fur cloak over her shimmering dress and forgot to smudge one finger with soot, leaving the ring gleaming. That night, when Thousand Furs was summoned, the king saw the ring and grabbed her hand. Her fur cloak slipped, revealing the starry dress beneath. Her golden hair shimmered as she wiped the soot from her face, and there she stood in all her splendour. "You are my bride," the king declared, "and we shall never part." Folklorists believe that thousands of years ago, the tale of Cinderella split into two distinct archetypes. One focuses on the heroine's struggle against a wicked stepfamily and features a magical helper, often the spirit of the heroine's mother. The other archetype, exemplified by the story of Thousand Furs, shifts the focus to a daughter escaping her father, with the theme of disguise playing a central role. The story of Thousand Furs, sometimes translated as All Kinds of Fur, was famously recorded by the brothers Grimm, but its roots run much deeper. Older versions of the tale have been documented, with the earliest recording dating back to the 13th century. In some versions, she disguises herself in a donkey skin, while in others it's a bear skin, a pig skin, or even a coat made from the skins of thousands of mice. But at its heart lies a deeply unsettling motif, a father's forbidden desire to marry his own daughter. While shocking, this incestuous motif is far from unique. Similar narratives appear across ancient mythology worldwide. In Greek mythology, for example, Myrrha falls in love with her father and, under the cover of darkness, disguises her identity to deceive him into lying with her. When her father discovers the truth, he is enraged and draws his sword to pursue her. Myrrha flees and after 9 months begs the gods for mercy. They take pity on her and transform her into a myrrh tree. In this form she gives birth to Adonis, and the aromatic resin of the myrrh tree is said to be Myrrha's eternal tears. There's even an example from the Bible, found in the book of Genesis. After the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's 2 daughters, believing they are the last humans on earth, conspire to intoxicate their father and seduce him. In folk stories like Thousand Furs, this motif often serves as a grim allegory for the abuse of power. The father king, wielding absolute authority, becomes a symbol of unchecked dominance, believing his desires should know no bounds. But the story may also have been shaped by real-life historical events and influences. Throughout history, royal families often arranged marriages within their own bloodlines to preserve power, wealth, and lineage. This practice, though politically advantageous, sometimes led to tragic outcomes. A striking example is the Habsburg Dynasty. The Habsburg Dynasty was one of the most influential royal families in European history, with origins tracing back to the 10th century in what is now Switzerland. From 1282 until 1918, the Habsburgs ruled Austria and an extensive empire that included regions such as Hungary, Bohemia, Spain, the Netherlands, and parts of Italy, shaping the political and cultural landscape of Europe for centuries. Their power expanded largely through strategic marriages rather than military conquests. This reliance on dynastic marriages, often within the family, ensured the preservation of their vast empire, but came at a steep cost. Generations of inbreeding led to severe genetic consequences, most famously the Habsburg jaw, a pronounced underbite caused by mandibular prognathism, which became increasingly exaggerated over time. Inbreeding also resulted in infertility and a higher prevalence of congenital disorders. The most extreme example was Charles II of Spain, who suffered severe physical and mental disabilities due to generations of intermarriage. Unable to produce an heir, his death triggered the War of Spanish Succession in 1700. Another possible inspiration for the tale of Thousand Furs lies in the legend of Saint Dymphna. Dymphna was said to be the daughter of a pagan Irish king and a devout Christian queen. After her mother's death, her father sought to remarry, but like the king in Thousand Furs, he demanded a bride who matched his late wife in beauty and virtue. Unable to find such a woman, he turned his eyes toward his own daughter. According to legend, Dymphna was just 15 years old when her father's obsession led her to flee her homeland. Accompanied by a small group of loyal companions, she sought refuge in Giel, a town in present-day Belgium. However, her father pursued her relentlessly, driven by his unhealthy fixation. When he finally caught up to her, Dymphna refused his demands, and enraged by her rejection, the king beheaded her on the spot. The story of St. Dymphna is traditionally believed to have taken place in the 7th century, though its historical accuracy remains uncertain. Her tale was first recorded in the 13th century, derived from oral tradition and local devotion to her memory. The Church of St. Dymphna in Giel was built in the 13th century specifically to honour her. This construction followed the discovery of a tomb containing the remains of a young woman, believed by locals to be St. Dymphna. These relics became objects of veneration and established the site as a significant place of pilgrimage for many years. While some believe St. Dymphna was a historical figure whose story became mythologized over time, some scholars suggest her legend may represent the Christianization of earlier pagan traditions, possibly linked to a local goddess or pre-Christian deity of the area. But regardless of her origin, it was in her memory and honour that Giel became renowned for its compassionate care for those with mental illness, a practice rooted directly in the town's veneration of her as a protector of the vulnerable and afflicted. By the 13th century, Giel adopted a revolutionary model of psychiatric care. Patients were welcomed into the homes of local families, where they could participate in family life during the day, fostering dignity and community, and return to the hospital at night to sleep. This system of care, directly tied to St. Dymphna's legacy, became a foundation for the idea of deinstitutionalization, a concept centuries ahead of its time. In 1880, Vincent van Gogh's father even considered sending his son to Giel, hoping the approach might help him. But this model of care was seen as too revolutionary by many institutions around the world, and only began to gain wider acceptance in the early 20th century. The legend of St. Dymphna bears such a striking resemblance to the tale of Thousand Furs that it seems likely there is some connection between them. However, not all stories of this type begin with a father wanting to marry his daughter. For instance, the English folktale Kappa Rushes, which shares many similarities with Thousand Furs, begins from a very different premise. A wealthy man had 3 daughters, and one day he asked each how much they loved him. The first replied, "As much as life." The second said, "As much as the world." But the third answered, "As much as meat needs salt." Misinterpreting her words, the father became enraged and in a fit of fury drove her out of his house. From this point, the tale closely mirrors Thousand Furs. Cast out and alone, the daughter disguises herself, not in a cloak of animal pelts, but in garments made of rushes. She seeks refuge in servitude, taking work in the kitchen of a wealthy household. And just as in Thousand Furs, she attends a grand ball in secret, shedding her disguise and captivating the prince with her beauty. Their love culminates in marriage, and at the wedding feast, Kappa Rushes requests that the meal be prepared without salt. As the dishes arrive tasteless and bland, her father, a guest at the banquet, breaks into tears. Only then does he understand the depth of her original declaration. Just as meat needs salt to be flavourful, her love for him was essential and profound. The tale ends with reconciliation, as her father begs for forgiveness. This story, with its themes of misinterpreted love and estrangement, is thought to have inspired one of Shakespeare's greatest tragedies, King Lear. In King Lear, the titular king, in his old age, decides to divide his kingdom among his 3 daughters, but first he demands that each publicly declare her love for him. The 2 older daughters, Goneril and Regan, flatter him with grand, empty words, but the youngest, Cordelia, offers only a simple, truthful statement: "I love your majesty according to my bond, no more nor less." Lear, like the father in Kappa Rushes, misinterprets her words as cold and unloving. Enraged, he disowns her, setting off a chain of events that leads to his downfall. Unlike the folktale, however, King Lear ends in tragedy, with Cordelia's death and Lear's descent into madness and grief. It's fascinating to consider how these Cinderella variations have quietly found their way into so many narratives and contexts. But these themes extend far beyond Western Europe. In the Slavic equivalent of Cinderella, we find a tale filled with betrayal, resilience, and an eerie sense of the supernatural. This story introduces one of folklore's most iconic figures, Baba Yaga. Long ago, there lived a merchant and his wife who, after many years of marriage, were blessed with a single child, a daughter named Vasilisa. Their happiness, however, was short-lived. When Vasilisa was just 8 years old, her mother fell gravely ill. Knowing her time was near, the mother called Vasilisa to her side. With a trembling hand, she gave her daughter a small doll. "Listen carefully, Vasilisa," she said softly. "I leave you this doll with my blessing. Keep it safe and never show it to anyone. Whenever you're in trouble, give it a little food and ask for its advice. It will always help you through your difficulties." And with these parting words, the mother took her last breath. After mourning his wife, Vasilisa's father remarried, seeking a kind stepmother for his daughter. He chose a widow with 2 daughters, trusting she would bring warmth and care to their home. Instead, the woman lavished affection on her own children, while subjecting Vasilisa to endless cruelty. Vasilisa was the most beautiful girl in the land, and her stepmother and stepsisters burned with jealousy. They scolded her endlessly and burdened her with exhausting chores, hoping the harsh sun and relentless toil would wither her beauty and leave her haggard and worn. But the more Vasilisa worked, the more beautiful she seemed to become, while her stepmother and stepsisters, consumed by envy, grew thin and ugly with spite. Vasilisa's secret was her little doll, which helped her with everything. Late at night, while the household slept, she would lock herself in her room, share her meagre food with the doll, and whisper, "Eat, little doll, and hear my troubles. Though I live in my father's house, I have no joy. My stepmother and stepsisters torment me endlessly. What should I do?" The doll would eat, offer her comfort, and quietly set to work. By morning, the chores were all magically done, and Vasilisa, free from the drudgery, could rest in the shade and gather flowers. One autumn, Vasilisa's merchant father departed on a long journey, leaving her alone with her stepmother and stepsisters. Their hut stood on the edge of a dense forest, home to Baba Yaga, the fearsome witch who was said to devour humans. One cold, moonless night, the stepmother assigned tasks to the girls, the eldest to weave lace, the second to knit stockings, and Vasilisa to spin yarn. Then she snuffed out all the lights in the house, leaving only a single flickering candle, and went to bed. Before long, the candle went out, plunging the hut into complete darkness. "What are we to do?" wailed the stepsisters. "We can't finish our work without light." They turned to Vasilisa, their eyes gleaming with malice. "You must go to Baba Yaga's house and fetch a light, Vasilisa." The sisters shoved Vasilisa out of the hut, thrusting a loaf of bread into her hands, and sent her into the dark forest. Trembling with fear, Vasilisa pulled her doll from her pocket, broke off a piece of bread, and whispered through her tears, "Oh, dear little doll, they're sending me to Baba Yaga's house for a light. She eats people, bones and all. What am I to do?" The doll ate the bread and replied softly, "Do not fear, Vasilisa. Go where you are sent. No harm will come to you as long as I am with you." The forest loomed around Vasilisa, dark and oppressive. She walked trembling through the suffocating shadows. Suddenly a horseman thundered past. He was dressed in white, his horse was white, and the horse's harness was white too. Moments later, the first light of dawn broke through the trees. As she ventured deeper into the forest, another horseman galloped by, this one dressed in red, riding a red horse with a red harness. Vasilisa walked all day, and as evening descended, she finally reached a clearing where Baba Yaga's hut loomed, perched atop enormous chicken legs. A fence of human bones encircled it, each post crowned with a skull. The doors were framed by human leg bones, secured with human hands for bolts, and a mouth with sharp, gleaming teeth in place of a lock. Frozen with terror, Vasilisa stood rooted to the spot. Suddenly a third horseman appeared, cloaked in black and riding a black horse with a black harness. He galloped up to Baba Yaga's door and vanished. As he passed, night fell, and the hollow eyes of the skulls on the fence began to glow with a sickly green light, casting an eerie brightness over the glade. As Vasilisa trembled, a dreadful noise echoed through the forest. The trees creaked, dry leaves rustled, and the ground shook. Baba Yaga emerged, riding in her mortar, wielding her pestle like a whip, and sweeping away her tracks with a broom. She landed, sniffed the air, and bellowed, "Fie! I smell Russian flesh. Who's there?" Vasilisa stepped forward, bowing low. "It is I, grandmother. My family sent me to ask you for a light." Baba Yaga narrowed her eyes and grinned. "Oh, it's you, is it? I know your stepmother. Very well. Stay with me for a while and work, or I'll eat you up." Inside the hut, Baba Yaga stretched out on her chair. "Serve me what's in the stove, girl. I'm hungry," she commanded. Vasilisa obeyed, setting out enough food, beer and wine to feed 10 men, but Baba Yaga devoured it all, leaving only a bowl of cabbage soup and a crust of bread for Vasilisa. "I'm tired," Baba Yaga said, wiping her mouth. "Tomorrow you must clean the yard, sweep the hut, cook supper, wash the linen, and sort the wheat in the bin, seed by seed, separating the mildewed grains from the good ones. Be sure to remove every black bit. If you fail, I will eat you." As Baba Yaga began to snore, her long nose rattling against the roof of the hut, Vasilisa quietly took out her doll, gave it the crust of bread, and whispered, "Please help me. Baba Yaga has given me an impossible task, and if I fail, she'll eat me." The doll replied softly, "Don't worry, Vasilisa. Eat your supper and rest. Mornings are wiser than evenings." At dawn, Vasilisa awoke and glanced out the window to see the white horseman galloping past. Moments later, the first light of day broke over the horizon. In the yard, Baba Yaga whistled sharply, and her pestle, mortar and broom appeared at once. Climbing aboard, she sped into the woods, sweeping away her tracks as she disappeared into the trees. Left alone, Vasilisa looked around the hut and gasped. All the work was already done. At the wheat bin, she saw her doll, helped by all the birds of the forest, pick out the last black bits of grain. The little doll slipped back into her pocket and whispered, "All that's left is to prepare the supper, then you can rest." Vasilisa cooked the meal, set the table, and waited. When Baba Yaga returned that evening, she asked, "Well, have you done what I told you?" "Please see for yourself, grandmother," Vasilisa replied. Baba Yaga's face darkened. She had hoped to eat the girl, but the tasks were flawlessly completed. Hiding her frustration, she said, "Very good," and then bellowed, "My faithful servants, my dear friends, grind the wheat." From nowhere, 3 pairs of disembodied hands appeared, seized the wheat and vanished. After devouring her supper, Baba Yaga prepared for bed and said, "Tomorrow you'll do the same tasks and sort the dust from the poppy seeds in the storeroom. If you fail, I will eat you." That night, Vasilisa fed her little doll again, sharing her worries. The doll reassured her, "Sleep now, dear Vasilisa. Mornings are wiser than evenings." At dawn, Baba Yaga rode off in her mortar, disappearing into the woods. Once again the doll set to work, calling on mice to help sort the dust from the seeds. By the evening, every task was complete, just as Baba Yaga had commanded. When Baba Yaga returned, she once again hid her frustration and called out, "My faithful servants, my dear friends, press the oil from the poppy seeds." From nowhere, the disembodied hands appeared, took the seeds, and vanished. As Baba Yaga sat to eat, she eyed Vasilisa and asked, "Why do you sit there so quiet and still?" "Oh, I did not dare to speak," Vasilisa replied, "but if you permit me, I have some questions I'd like to ask." "Ask if you wish," Baba Yaga said, narrowing her eyes. "But remember, not all questions have good answers, and those who know too much grow old too soon." Vasilisa hesitated, then began. "On my way here, I saw a white horseman. Who was he?" "That was my bright dawn," Baba Yaga replied. "And the red horseman?" Vasilisa asked. "That was my red sun," said Baba Yaga. "And the black horseman who passed me at your gate?" "That was my black midnight," Baba Yaga answered. "They are my faithful servants. Any more questions?" Vasilisa thought of the disembodied hands, but decided against it. "No, grandmother. As you said, those who know too much grow old too soon." Baba Yaga smirked. "A wise choice. I tolerate questions about the outside of my house, but I dislike curiosity about what happens inside, and I eat the overly curious. Now let me ask you something. How have you managed to complete all the tasks I gave you?" Vasilisa nervously answered, "My mother's blessing helped me." Baba Yaga scowled. "Ah, I knew it! Well, you better leave at once. I want no blessed ones under my roof." With that, Baba Yaga shoved Vasilisa out of the hut and through the gate. She grabbed a skull with glowing eyes, placed it on the end of a stick, and thrust it into Vasilisa's hands. "Here's a light for your stepmother and her daughters," she sneered. "Take it. It's what you came for, isn't it?" Vasilisa hurried home, the skull's eerie glow lighting her way. By the following night she had reached the house. As she neared, she thought to discard the skull, but a muffled voice stopped her. "Do not throw me away," said the skull. "Take me to your stepmother and her daughters." Vasilisa brought the skull into the house, where her stepfamily exclaimed that no light or fire had stayed lit since she left. Then the skull's glowing green eyes fixed on the stepmother and her daughters, burning them like fire. They tried to flee, but the unrelenting gaze followed them everywhere. By morning, nothing remained of the three women but heaps of ash on the floor. Vasilisa buried the skull in the garden and sought shelter in a nearby town, lodging with a kind old woman as she awaited her father's return. One day the woman gave her some flax, and Vasilisa spun it into thread so fine it was like hair. She wove the thread into exquisite cloth and fashioned it into a beautiful shirt. "Grandmother," Vasilisa said, "you've been so kind to me. Sell this shirt and keep the money." The old woman marvelled at the craftsmanship and replied, "Child, this is too fine to sell. I will take it to the Tsar." When the Tsar saw the shirt, he was so impressed that he demanded to meet the needlewoman who had created it. Brought before him, Vasilisa's beauty struck him deeply, and he fell in love at once. The two were soon married, and when her father returned, he joined them at the palace. Vasilisa lived the rest of her days in peace and comfort, always keeping her little doll in her pocket. The tale of Vasilisa the Beautiful is rich with recurring motifs that echo through Cinderella stories across cultures, yet it stands apart with its distinctly Slavic flavour. One of the most poignant elements of this story is the role of Vasilisa's mother's spirit, symbolised by the doll. This motif of a mother's love transcending death to protect her child appears in many other Cinderella variants. In our Part 1 video, we explored Yexian, an ancient Chinese tale where the heroine is aided by magical fish bones imbued with her mother's spirit. Similarly, in the German versions of Cinderella, a magical tree, often grown from the mother's grave, provides assistance to the heroine. Like many Cinderella stories, Vasilisa the Beautiful features the cruel stepmother and stepsisters, as well as the traditional ending, with marriage to a royal figure. However, a striking difference lies in the heroine's challenge, not attending a grand ball, but braving the house of Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga is one of the most iconic and enigmatic figures in Slavic folklore, known for her dual role as both a fearsome villain and a wise guide. Likely rooted in ancient Slavic pagan traditions, she may have originated as a nature deity or spirit connected to death, rebirth, and the wild. Scholars suggest she likely evolved from early beliefs in household and forest spirits. Baba Yaga is often associated with the boundary between life and death, symbolising the liminal space between worlds. Her iconic hut on chicken legs, constantly moving, embodies this transitional nature. She shares traits with Indo-European figures like the Hindu goddess Kali and the Greek Hecate, both associated with death, transformation, and wisdom. Baba Yaga is often depicted as all-knowing, holding powerful secrets, but she only grants them to those who prove their worth through courage and cleverness. The light Vasilisa must bring back from Baba Yaga, therefore, could be interpreted as a metaphor for enlightenment, a reward for confronting darkness and emerging transformed. But light plays a central role throughout the story. The three horsemen in Vasilisa the Beautiful, representing dawn, day, and night, may hint at connections to ancient pagan cosmology. In Slavic mythology, the forces of nature, including celestial bodies and the passage of time, were often personified as powerful deities. For instance, Dazbog, the sun god, symbolized life and prosperity, while Zoraya, whose name translates to dawn, is often portrayed as the sister of the sun and the moon. She resides in the Palace of the Sun, where she opens its gates each morning to allow Dazbog to embark on his journey across the sky, while also guarding his majestic white horses. The horsemen in Vasilisa the Beautiful may be echoes of these ancient mythological figures, embodying the natural cycles of day and night. They also share striking similarities with the three magical dresses in Thousand Furs, which are described as shining like the sun, moon, and stars. This parallel further reinforces the theme of celestial symbolism, weaving together motifs of light, time, and transformation. Slavic lands, particularly Russia, experience long, harsh winters with limited daylight. It's possible that Vasilisa the Beautiful evolved from pagan myths that celebrated the triumph of light over darkness, especially during winter solstice festivals. In pagan and pre-Christian Slavic regions, the winter solstice, known as Korochan, or Krakun in some regions, was a deeply significant event marking the shortest day and longest night of the year, around December 21st. It symbolized the sun's death, after which its strength was reborn, gradually triumphing over darkness as the days grew longer. Slavs believed the solstice was when the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest, making it a time to honor ancestors and spirits. Bonfires were lit to symbolize the sun's return, driving away darkness and protecting against malevolent forces. These rituals celebrated the renewal of light, life, and the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. Another parallel to the horsemen in Vasilisa the Beautiful can be drawn with the four horsemen of the apocalypse from the Bible. In Revelation, the horsemen embody conquest, war, famine, and death, forces of apocalyptic change. And interestingly, it's within the Bible that one of the oldest parallels to the Cinderella archetype can be found. Esther, a Jewish orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai, becomes Queen of Persia after the king summons maidens from across the empire to his palace to choose a bride. The king is captivated by Esther and selects her as queen, but Mordecai warns her to hide her Jewish identity. Meanwhile, Haman, the king's advisor, plots to exterminate the Jews after Mordecai refuses to bow to him. Mordecai urges Esther to intervene, warning her that she too could perish if the Jews are destroyed. Risking her life, Esther approaches the king without being summoned, a punishable offense. She invites the king and Haman to a banquet, where she later reveals Haman's plot and her own Jewish identity. Furious, the king orders Haman's execution on the gallows Haman had built for Mordecai. The Jews are saved, and Mordecai is honored. This victory is celebrated annually in the Jewish festival of Purim, commemorating Esther's bravery and the survival of her people. Esther's story parallels the Cinderella narrative in several striking ways. Starting as an orphan living a humble life, she rises to royalty through a selection process reminiscent of Cinderella's ball. Chosen for her beauty, Esther transitions from rags to riches, and like Cinderella, she hides her true identity, which is revealed in a dramatic and defining moment that changes everything. The Cinderella story is one of the most retold narratives in the world, with thousands of variations across cultures and continents. Its timeless themes of transformation, hidden identity, and triumph over adversity have resonated through generations. Among the most gruesome versions is a Norse-inspired tale steeped in violence and revenge. Iceland's rich storytelling tradition, shaped by its 9th century settlement by Norse explorers and their Celtic slaves, created a unique fusion of cultural folklore. From this blend emerged the chilling story of Mjaðveig Mánadóttir, often called the Icelandic Cinderella. In a faraway kingdom, King Mani ruled with wisdom and strength, cherishing his only daughter, Mjaðveig, whose beauty and grace were unmatched. He built her a grand bower and surrounded her with attentive maids-in-waiting, ensuring she grew up in comfort and care. But when the queen fell gravely ill and passed away, Mani was overcome with grief. Consumed by sorrow, he neglected his realm until his ministers urged him to take a new wife. The king chose a noble woman with a daughter close in age to Mjaðveig, hoping to restore balance to his household. Soon after their wedding, Mani departed on a royal progress, entrusting his new queen with the kingdom's affairs. One day, the queen invited Mjaðveig and her daughter for a walk beyond the city. Far from prying eyes, the queen ordered Mjaðveig to exchange dresses with her daughter. Reluctantly, Mjaðveig complied, unaware of the trap. With a swift spell, the queen made her daughter identical to Mjaðveig in appearance. Before Mjaðveig could react, the queen and her daughter bound her hand and foot, leaving her helpless on the ground. They returned to the city, placing the impostor in Mjaðveig's bower. Though the maids noticed changes in her behaviour, they dismissed them, unaware of the queen's wicked scheme. Helpless and abandoned, Mjaðveig lay bound on the ground, her tears flowing until she cried herself to sleep. In her despair, she dreamed of her late mother, who appeared with words of comfort and compassion. In the dream, her mother untied her bonds and gave her a magical cloth filled with food that replenished itself endlessly. "Guard this cloth carefully," her mother warned. "Never let it empty or be seen by others, and beware of your stepmother and her daughter." When Mjaðveig awoke, she found the dream was real. Her bonds were undone, and beside her lay the enchanted cloth, just as her mother had promised. Fearing that Mjaðveig might still be alive, the queen sent her daughter to spy on her. Finding Mjaðveig, the daughter feigned concern and friendship, but as soon as Mjaðveig fell asleep, she stole the magical cloth and fled. Alone and abandoned once more, Mjaðveig despaired. That night, she dreamed of her mother again. Her mother spoke gently, guiding her. "Go down to the sea. There you will find a narrow tongue of land stretching into the waves. At its end stands a small house, locked but with the key in the door. Walk 3 times forward and 3 times backward around the house, touching the key each time. On the final pass, the house will open, and there you will find shelter for a while." Mjaðveig awoke and followed her mother's instructions, finding peace at last in her secluded abode. But one day, she spotted a fleet of ships approaching the harbour. Terrified, she fled back to her house, running so fast that a golden shoe slipped from her foot and was left behind. The fleet's leader was a prince, who, while travelling to the town, discovered the delicate golden shoe along his path. Captivated by its small size, he vowed to marry only the woman whose foot it fit. When he arrived at the king's palace, the queen exclaimed, "That shoe belongs to my daughter, Mjaðveig. She lost it while walking." Taking the shoe to her daughter in private, the queen explained the prince's vow. The daughter tried desperately to force her foot inside, but it wouldn't fit. Determined, the queen cruelly cut off her daughter's heel and toes, forcing the shoe onto her mangled foot. As the prince made his way back to his ship with his bride, he passed near the house of the true Mjaðveig and heard birds chirping in unison. Their song warned him that his bride was an impostor. Alarmed, the prince placed a magical piece of enchanted armour, a spell-dissolving shoulder plate, on his bride. Instantly, her human disguise vanished, revealing a hideous troll. Forced to confess, the troll revealed the wicked plot she and her mother had devised. Enraged, the prince slew the creature, salted her remains, and packed them into 12 barrels. The prince found the little house where the real Mjaðveig awaited. He produced the golden shoe, and when he placed it on her foot, it fit perfectly. To his delight, she revealed its matching pair, confirming her identity as his true bride. The prince invited King Mani and the stepmother to a grand wedding feast aboard his personal ship. Once on board, the stepmother retired to her chamber, refusing to join the festivities. The prince approached her with a polite inquiry about her health. The queen replied, "My health is fragile, and I can only stomach meat." Seizing the opportunity, the prince mentioned that he had some salted meat aboard, though it was still raw. The queen, her eyes gleaming with hunger, eagerly requested it without hesitation. Unbeknownst to others, the queen revealed her true troll form while eating meat, reverting to her human guise afterwards. This continued for 11 days. On the 12th day, as she feasted on the last barrel, the prince and King Mani spied on her. The king at last learned the horrifying truth. His wife was a troll and a cannibal who had devoured her own daughter. To end her evil, the prince and his allies set the ship ablaze, slipping quietly away with King Mani to another vessel. As the flames reached the gunpowder aboard, the ship erupted in a fiery explosion, destroying the troll queen once and for all. Mjaðveig and the prince were wed soon after, their union blessed with joy and peace, and they lived happily into old age. The Cinderella story is more than a fairy tale. It's a thread that ties humanity together across time and culture. From the haunting tragedy of Thousand Furs to the resilient courage of Vasilisa and the chilling revenge of Mjaðveig, each version carries unique echoes of its place and time, while sharing universal themes of perseverance, transformation, and justice. It's fascinating to think that this story, with its ancient roots, has evolved into countless variations spanning continents and centuries. Versions have been discovered in nearly every corner of the globe. Yet the version most familiar to us today, immortalised by Charles Perrault in 1697 and later brought to life by Disney, is a relatively recent addition to this rich tapestry. Its whimsical charm, with pumpkin coaches and glass slippers, has captivated audiences for generations, yet it represents just the tip of the iceberg in a tale far older and far more complex. But which version is your favourite? Let me know in the comments below, and if your hunger for fairy tale origins still persists, be sure to subscribe and explore the rest of my channel. See you in a future video.